Hello, my name is Alice. Welcome to Learn to Knit. Today I'm going to run through with you 5 of the most popular and commonly used cast-on methods in knitting. Now, these are methods that you're likely to come across in projects, but also they're good to have in your head so that when you're doing projects that just simply tell you to cast on X amount of stitches, you have a little menu of approaches and methods, and you can determine for yourself which one you like, whether that is the finish of the edge that it gives you or whether it's simply the way it feels in your hands. So in order to demonstrate this, I have a pair of needles. These are actually double pointed needles, so they're shorter than usual, but they will serve the purpose. I have some yarn, and I also have a crochet hook, which is actually just a little bit smaller than my needle. These are 5mm and this is a 4.5, and that's because one of the methods I'm going to demonstrate for you is called the crochet cast on, and as the name suggests, you're going to need a crochet hook. Let's just quickly talk about what casting on is. Casting on is creating the width of the project. That is the stitches that you are going to initially work into. So what we need to do is create those stitches. And the very first thing we're going to do is a slip knot, which you will have seen in my lesson 1 of my Knit with Confidence course. I'm going to leave a tail of a couple of inches, which I would sew in at the end. I am creating a loop and then popping the yarn through and pulling to create a slip knot. I am now going to add that onto what's going to become my left hand needle, and I'm going to tuck the tail into my left hand so it's out of the way and I won't confuse it with the working yarn, and I will knit with the right yarn because I'm not going to get very far with that. Okay, the very first method I'm going to show you is the English cast on. It's also known as the knitted cast on, and you will see why. So I've got my slip knot ready to go, and what I'm going to do is pop my right hand needle into that stitch front to back, wrap the yarn over, bring that needle, the right hand needle, back the way it came, flicking out the side with a new loop which I'm going to add to the left hand needle. I'm going to repeat that in my new stitch. So right hand needle goes in front to back, yarn is wrapped over the right hand needle, and I hold it down here like a bit of a dog lead to give it some tension so that when I bring this needle back the way it came, flicking out the side, add that new loop on, it's nice and easy. So once again, in, wrap the yarn, bring it through, add it on. So you're probably seeing why this is called a knitted cast on as well as an English cast on, and that's because it's exactly the same steps as knitting, except instead of keeping that new loop, you are giving it to the left hand needle. The way I tell my students to remember what casting on is that you are giving the left hand needle friends. The right hand needle is doing all the work, all the chat, and creating new loops for the left hand needle. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to speed up in a moment and I'm going to quickly just knit a few rows, knit and purl, so that you can see what the edge of an English aka knitted cast on looks like. So right now I have 2, 4, 6, 8 stitches. I'm going to create 2 more. So needle goes in, wrap the yarn, bring it through, flicking out the side, add that new loop on, and you'll see that I'm tightening with the working yarn, but not to the point where they can't move, because my needle's going to have to get back in there. I don't want to have to carve in there. So I want them to be comfortably on the needle, not loose, too loose so that they're sort of flopping off, but equally that they are comfortably on there and there's room for my other needle to get in. I'm just going to have a recount, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Perfect. Okay, so I'm now just going to speed up a little bit, simply to knit a few rows so that you can actually see what the English knitted, aka knitted cast on edge looks like, so you can compare with all these methods and determine for yourself with your projects which you like. I'm actually going to purl this side because I think you'll get a cleaner view with stocking it. Stitch pattern, which is when you're knitting one row, purling the next row. Have all your knit stitches on one side and your purl stitches on the other. This is quite a fine yarn for these needles, so the stitch might be a bit loose. I think we just need 2 more rows and then you're going to be able to see the finish, the edge. This is a cast on, very versatile cast on. You can use this for scarves, blankets, sweaters, potentially. The reason I say that is, and you'll start seeing already, it's somewhat of a decorative edge. It's not the most elastic. It's a sort of moderately sturdy, not particularly elastic, but can you see that you get this sort of lacy edge? And so for me personally, I keep that in mind when I'm choosing my cast on, because if I was to do a hat, for example, I personally wouldn't choose this cast on because I would rather have a cleaner edge for my hat rather than this kind of decorative edge. However, that being said, this is perfect, quite possibly for blankets or scarves. I particularly like this for scarves because these little holes indicate where I could put tassels. Very nice and clean and easy to spot my opportunities for tassels. So that is your English cast on. If I turn it around this way on the purl side, you can see you get these sort of wholly decorative, somewhat decorative finish. All right, we will now move on to the cable cast on. Okay, so here we are ready to do the cable cast on, my favourite cast on. Once again, you're going to need a slip knot with a good couple of inches tail. It's actually a bit of a long tail there, but I will tuck that up into my left hand needle as I did before, so it's out the way. Slip knot not too tight on my needle, with enough room for my other needle to get into it, and not too loose that it's falling off. So the cable cast on is exactly the same as the knitted cast on, except for one difference. So initially we go in exactly the same. We go into that stitch, wrap the yarn, bring it through, flicking out the side, add it on. Now here's the difference. I am now going to, now that I have 2 stitches, I'm going to put my needle between the 2 stitches. So I have the yarn underneath. So I go between the 2 stitches, wrap the yarn, bring it through. This time you're going to have to flick up in order to bring that new loop through, and add that on to the left hand needle. You will see that those last 2 stitches cross over each other. That's perfectly normal. Please do not worry if you see that. That's perfectly normal. However, we are going to put our needle between those 2 stitches, so you may want to try and move that cross so it's below. Needle goes in between the last 2 stitches, wraps the yarn, bring it through, flick up, add the new loop onto the left. Once again, needle goes between the last 2 stitches so that the yarn is underneath. Wrap the yarn, bring it back the way it came, flicking up, and then add that new loop on. Now this cable cast on is very versatile. It gives a much tighter braided edge to your work. And again, I will knit a few rows so that you can see and compare. But I like this one for hats, for sweaters, for anything that I kind of want a nice neat edge. That would be my kind of go-to. Now, see, I've run away with myself now. I don't even know how many stitches I have. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So I'm going to knock one off because I only really want 10. For this, I'm going to knit and purl just a couple of rows so that you can see the edge that is created when you do the cable cast on. Because the whole reason there are different cast on methods it's a combination of aesthetics and the sort of stretchy qualities. But there are a lot of cast on methods. These 5 are the most commonly used. So you should be able to use this video as a solid resource for a whole range of projects. So I think I will knit one more row and you'll very quickly be able to see okay, so in comparison, see if I can pull this down a bit, you can see that the cable cast on gives this braided edge. There are no holes like the English cast on, and it kind of goes straight into the knitting. So there's no kind of border. So there you go, that's the cable cast on. Lovely braided edge, not too tight, not too loose, not particularly elastic. Okay, we are next going to move on to the long tail cast on. Okay, so now we're going to look at the long tail cast on, and this is another very versatile cast on which is moderately elastic. So not the most elastic or stretchy, but a really good go-to cast on for things like socks or hats, sweaters, cuffs. Yeah, it can feel fiddly. I'm just going to give you fair warning, but very quickly it will become second nature. So the long tail cast on is a slight variation on the other two in that we definitely do need a slip knot. However, as is a clue in the name, we are going to use a long tail to create our stitches. So the way we're going to do that, the sort of secret to a long tail cast on is in anticipating how long the tail is that you're going to need. And I think you'll understand that more as we go along. So, but if you follow along here, this is a good little tip for how to ensure that you have a tail long enough for this cast on. So I always leave a tail of a couple of inches, and then I take the yarn where I would normally put the slip knot, and I pop that over the needle, and I just comfortably wrap the yarn however many times to represent the amount of stitches I want. I don't want them to be too bunched up together, but I don't want them to be too spaced out either. So in my case, I'm going to need 10 stitches. So I've got one hidden here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to keep wrapping until I have 10. So let's just double check that. I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That is the point where I am going to now put a slip knot. So I'm going to pop that there. So now I have this long tail. I'm going to pop that slip knot onto my needle, which is going to feel like my right hand needle now. And then I've got the working yarn running up and the tail running down. Now what I'm going to do with these 2 strands of yarn is I am going to put them over my left hand like this. So I have the working yarn running around my index finger and the tail running down and around my thumb. So I kind of create a bit of a diamond shape here. And you can see in the rest of my hand, I'm holding the 2 strands of yarn. So I have the slip knot on my needle, my right hand needle, the working yarn over my index finger, and the tail over my thumb. Okay, so now we are going to create our stitches. With our needle, I'm going to pull the needle towards my thumb, which creates somewhat of a loop. As you can see, it crosses over. I'm going to pop my needle into the loop and then fish through the yarn that is over my index finger and fish that through that loop and then pull. And then we have a new stitch. I'm going to repeat the same thing. So the yarn, the tail is over my thumb, my working yarn is over my index finger. My needle is going to reach down towards my thumb to create a loop. Needle's going to go into that loop and then essentially knit through the yarn over my index finger through that loop I just created, and then pull. Yeah? Okay, we're going to keep going. This is commonly used for, as I say, socks, can be used for hats. It has a bit more elasticity than the previous two cast-ons. And it also is literally knitting stitches. So there is no creating stitches and then knitting them. So once again, right hand needle leans over to my thumb, creates a loop, goes in, knits through the yarn from my index finger, pulls tight. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. I've got one more stitch to create. And then, as before, I'm going to just knit a couple of rows. When I say knit, I'm going to knit and purl a couple of rows. There we are. You can see though already it's a very neat, clean finish, or start, I guess I should say, as a cast on. I'm now going to knit and then purl just a couple of rows so that you can see what the finished edge looks like for a long tail cast on. Now I've only changed colour of yarn, just so you know, it's not that you only can use a certain type of yarn. It was more that I had worked that pink yarn quite a bit and it was starting to loosen its twist, its ply, but also it's a bit more interesting, isn't it? A different colour yarn. I think I'll do one more row of knitting and then you will be able to see the long tail cast on edge. Okay, so there we go. You can see it has just a bit of elasticity. It's not got that tight braided edge that the cable cast on has. A little bit more textured, but it goes straight into the knitting, and on the other side there you can see. So that is the long tail cast on. Next we're going to look at the backward loop cast on, also using our hands more than just knitting needles. So we are now going to look at the backward loop cast on. This is really versatile cast on and particularly useful when you have to create new stitches in the middle of a row. So the way we are going to do a backward loop is, again, we're going to do a slip knot, leaving a tail of just a couple of inches. So there it is. I'm going to pop that onto one needle, which will be my right hand needle, tucking my tail up. And then this is a much looser cast on. You're literally going to take the yarn, the working yarn, over your thumb and forefinger, and you're going to create, just as we did before, you're going to pull your needle over, creating a loop, and you're just going to slip that on. So once again, pulling the needle over, let me move this needle out of the way, pulling the needle, so you've kind of got this pyramid of the yarn is over your index finger and thumb, and then the needle is coming across to create a loop, and then you are popping that on to your needle. So it comes across to create a loop, needle goes in to pick that up, and there it is. Can be a very quick cast on. It is a looser edge, 2, 4, 6, 7. But yeah, very versatile, especially if you need to create stitches in the middle of a project. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Perfect. Once again, I will knit and purl couple of stitches, sorry, a couple of rows, so that you can see. Now, can you see when you knit it, it does have this sort of looseness to it. So you do kind of have to plow on with a bit of confidence for your first row, because it has a lot more, it doesn't have as much structure as the others that we have covered. But once you've done your first row, now I've pulled these a little bit tight onto my needle, so that's something to be aware of. But yeah, once you've done your first row, then you're away. And the more this feels tight, of course, because all the excess is here. So if you did need to create a bit more room to get your needle in, you can kind of pull the stitch so that it reduces that slack that's been created here, and you can get into your stitch comfortably. Okay, so I'm now going to purl a row, and again I think I will knit another row after that, and then you'll be able to see what the edge of a backward loop cast on looks like. One more knitted row. Okay, and now you can see it's a looser kind of braided edge, not as holey or kind of lace-like as the English, aka knitted cast on, not as tight as the cable cast on, a little bit more elasticity than either of those, but there you go. So it's a nice, easy, clean cast on. Like if you did have to create new stitches in the middle of a project, then you can't really tell. It's not doesn't stand out as a big sore thumb. So yeah, there you go. That is the backward loop cast on. Finally, we are going to do the crochet cast on. So for our final cast on method, we are going to look at the crochet cast on method. Now this is often also termed as the provisional cast on method, and that is where it can create a sort of starter edge, let's put it that way. So if you needed to join another piece onto your knitting, you can actually remove this cast on and be left with live stitches that you can then pick up on another needle. But for the purpose of this video, I'm simply going to demonstrate the crochet cast on. As a standalone cast on, it gives you a very nice braided edge. Looks, as you can imagine, it's got like a crochet trim to it. So what I need for this is my 2 needles, a crochet hook that is a very similar or as close to size. So my needles are a 5mm, I have a 4.5mm crochet hook, and I have yarn. I'm actually only going to need 1 needle for the actual cast on. Once again, I'm going to create a slip knot with a couple of inches tail, and I'm going to pop that onto my crochet hook here. Now I'm going to pick up my needle, and I am going to hold the working yarn. I'm going to try and keep the tail away, but I'm going to hold the working yarn underneath my knitting needle. See if I can tuck that up, and then that's easier. And literally what I'm going to do is, with my crochet hook, I am going to wrap the yarn around it and bring it through the loop that was on my needle. I'm going to do that one more time for you because I appreciate that that could sound a little crazy. So my slip knot is on my crochet hook, my tail is wrapped up in my hand so it's out the way, the working yarn is underneath the knitting needle. My crochet hook is going to reach over, so that the yarn is still underneath, reach over, loop the yarn through over my crochet hook, and I'm going to bring it through the loop that was on my crochet hook. And then I'm going to move the yarn back behind the knitting needle, and I'm going to repeat. So the crochet hook wraps the yarn around it, feeds it through the loop. Now if you have never crocheted before, I fully appreciate that this is going to feel quite strange, but it will very quickly become comfortable. Make sure that the yarn is always underneath the knitting needle in between creating stitches. Once again, wrap it round the crochet hook, pull it through the loop, and then return the yarn, and you can see that we're creating a lovely edge. Now, one thing to keep in mind for this cast on method is that your last stitch will be the one that's on your crochet hook. So say I need 10 stitches, I am going to use this method to create 9 because this is my 10th stitch. So once again, my yarn, I'm wrapping it around my crochet hook, bringing it through the loop, and then returning the yarn to the back of the stitch, sorry, back of the needle. Now if you were using this as a provisional cast on, aka like a temporary cast on that you're going to end up pulling out to reveal live stitches, then you would do this with some scrap yarn. So if you ever come across a provisional cast on, quite often it will say with scrap yarn and a crochet hook, create X amount of stitches. And my tip to you would be make sure that that yarn is quite a different colour to the main body of your knitting, so it's really clear where your provisional cast on is. I think I've cast on way too many here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, and then there's my 12th. So I am going to undo them. So you can see I just literally pull. I can pop that through, but I still have one too many. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, this would be my 11th stitch. So I am going to pull the yarn to release it, pop this back onto my stitch, onto my crochet hook, add that on to my needle, and there are my 10 stitches. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And once again I'm going to knit and purl just a couple of rows so that you can see what the crochet cast on looks like. I definitely encourage you to have a go with all of these cast on methods, because the more you give them a go, the more you will find your favourite, your go-to. And also it's really nice to have a few that you feel comfortable with so that you can be versatile with your projects, because what suits one blanket, for example, might not suit another, or what suits a sweater might not necessarily suit the hat that you want to make. So as I said earlier, there are lots of cast on methods, and they all have slightly different aesthetics or qualities, generally around elasticity, but these are kind of your 5 most common. Okay, that is just a few rows, but you can now see the edge of the crochet cast on. It really mirrors a cast off edge, so where the stitches are kind of layered on top of each other. So that's good to know. So for example, if you were doing a blanket, you might want your cast on edge to look very similar to your cast off edge. And there it is. And it is somewhat elastic, but it's more that it has this lovely finish to it. And on the other side, it's not too tight. Turn it round here, but it is somewhat decorative. Okay, that is 5 cast on methods. that will serve you for a variety of projects, and I encourage you to have a play. And I would love to know which is your favourite. Thank you so much for watching. You will find on this page a bunch of helpful free tutorials to help you keep knitting and keep all the sort of overwhelm away. So should you drop a stitch or need to pick up a stitch or understand what gauge swatching is or know how to weave your ends in, you will find a video tutorial taking you step by step on this page. Thank you so much for watching and happy knitting!